My dears, have you ever accidentally overheard a conversation that wasn't meant for your ears, but changed everything? Sometimes, what's whispered behind closed doors hides more than just words. It can reveal dark intentions, silent betrayals, or even save a life. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a woman who heard what no one was supposed to, and because of that, uncovered a chilling plan that would shake even the strongest hearts. Get ready. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
The Maplewood Mountains of Oregon held secrets as ancient as the trees that cloaked them, an illusory stillness rarely disrupted. On that overcast morning, however, the serenity was shattered by an atypical communication that landed upon the desk of Agent Elias Thorne, a veteran of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, renowned for his keen intellect and his aversion to cases that resolve themselves with facile simplicity. Elias favored complexity, the labyrinth of motives and deceptions. This, he knew, would be one such case. The preliminary report outlined an unusual allegation. It wasn't a case of a crime already perpetrated, but rather one of a planned offense, still in its nascent stages, revealed by the potential victim herself. Helena Strauss, a 73-year-old former professor and recent widow, had contacted federal authorities with a narrative that, at first blush, seemed delusional. She alleged that her only son, Daniel, and his wife, Melissa, were plotting her demise. The initial account, coldly detailed in the written record, described Helena's move into the couple's home following her husband's passing, the promise of care and comfort that swiftly dissolved into a web of rejection and isolation. Thorne read about Helena's belongings being gradually removed from her room, the manner in which she was subtly excluded from family meals, forced to dine alone in a corner of the kitchen, and even the family dog, once her loyal companion, now avoiding her as if sensing something malevolent. The breaking point, as recounted by Helena, stemmed from a conversation overheard by chance. Daniel and Melissa, in a disturbingly casual tone, were dissecting the particulars of a vehicular incident. The chosen conveyance was a gleaming, brand-new SUV, recently acquired by them for Helena, ostensibly for her convenience. The motive? A life insurance policy of $10 million, secretly procured in Helena's name, bearing a forged signature. Elias's mind, accustomed to navigating the depths of human depravity, meticulously cataloged each detail, each inconsistency, and each query. Families, he knew, could be minefields of resentment and avarice, but a scheme so callous and meticulously orchestrated, originating from a son, was enough to curdle the blood. Helena's denunciation was not merely a nebulous accusation. It was substantiated by a compendium of evidence the elderly woman, with astonishing lucidity, professed to have amassed. Documents, audio recordings, emails, and even the allusion to surreptitiously placed devices within the SUV were cited. The collaboration of a retired attorney, a long-standing confidant of Helena's, Margot Blake, lent a veneer of credibility that Elias found impossible to disregard. A 73-year-old woman, acting independently, orchestrating a counteroffensive against her own family, seeking redress before the very commission of the offense, was an unprecedented development in his career. The immediate query confronting Elias was the veracity of the allegations. Was Helena a paranoid senior, a victim of her own fractured psyche, or was she contending with a tangible and dreadful menace emanating from those sworn to safeguard her? The exigency of the situation was palpable. If the narrative held true, every second was of paramount importance. Serene Maplewood, with its quaint residences and picture-perfect facades, could be concealing a wellspring of darkness and betrayal. Agent Thorne experienced the familiar frisson of the hunt, the challenge of unraveling the truth lurking beneath the veneer of normalcy. It was the type of enigma that captivated him, where the delineation between victim and perpetrator was as attenuated as the trust that should inherently exist within a family unit. The investigation necessitated immediate commencement. The deceptively placid veneer of Maplewood was soon to yield to a tempest. Agent Elias Thorne was not a man given to haste, favoring instead the surgical patience that allowed truth to surface of its own accord. In his office, the constant hum of the computer served as the score to his deep immersion into Daniel and Melissa's digital and bureaucratic trails. He commenced at the foundation, sweeping through public records, scrutinizing credit histories, and examining open banking transactions. He was searching for anomalies, for any discrepancy between the public image and the financial reality. Minor, unexpected debts, a sudden upswing in expenditures, or even the absence of patterns that ought to be present, all were scrutinized. The facade of a tranquil, middle-class family, with consistent income and minimal fluctuations, began to display micro-fissures under this cold, calculated analysis, hinting at an invisible pressure lurking beneath the veneer of apparent stability. Upon shifting the investigative focus to the field, Elias embraced discretion as his primary weapon. Maplewood, with its immaculate streets and inquisitive neighbors, served as a stage where a misstep could alert the individuals under suspicion. He assimilated into the environment a silent observer. He meticulously documented the daily rhythms of the residents, the nuances of their greetings, the familiarity that only thrives within close-knit, insular communities. This idyllic ambience, however, served only to amplify the unsettling premonition that something fundamentally amiss lay concealed beneath the veneer. It was as though the town itself, in its untouched beauty, was complicit in a secret, an invitation for darkness to insinuate itself unnoticed. Daniel and Melissa's conduct, upon close observation, betrayed a rehearsed social choreography. In their infrequent outings with Helena, the pair exhibited an almost theatrical solicitude. Daniel offered his arm to his mother with a degree of attentiveness that bordered on the ostentatious, while Melissa dispensed affable smiles to anyone who happened to observe them, as if intent on reinforcing the image of a perfect family. However, the operative recognized that this display of affection was ephemeral, vanishing the moment they moved beyond public scrutiny. The discrepancy between their public performance and the absence of genuine interaction, such as the lack of shared laughter or spontaneous gestures of endearment, spoke volumes about the true dynamics of the household. Elias meticulously scrutinized the minutiae that might substantiate Helena's self-imposed seclusion. He noted the unwavering regularity of her solitary meals in the kitchen, the conspicuous absence of her presence at social gatherings or during visits from the couple's acquaintances, and the peculiar manner in which the family dog seemed to actively avoid Helena, favoring the company of Daniel and Melissa. A point of particular interest was the brand-new SUV, which remained untouched in the garage. Daniel and Melissa utilized a different vehicle for all their outings, leaving Helena's car as a museum piece, pristine and unused. Was this a casual oversight or a crucial component of a more sinister scheme, awaiting the moment of its activation? With each observation, the narrative thickened, transmuting the initial accusation into a labyrinth of contradictions and half-truths. Maplewood's veneer of normalcy resembled a fragile sheet of ice atop tumultuous waters, while Daniel and Melissa's benevolence appeared a mask, beginning to dissolve under the heat of scrutiny. The agent understood that the observation phase was culminating. The ensuing step necessitated a more incisive approach, a maneuver poised to shatter the facade and expose the putrescence beneath. The looming question: what further revelations would emerge when the truth was finally confronted? Delving beneath the veneer of urban normalcy, Agent Elias Thorne transitioned from passive observation to a more penetrating investigation, immersing himself in the shadowed recesses of familial history. What surfaced was not merely a macabre scheme, but an intricate tapestry of thwarted ambitions and unbridled desires, meticulously woven over the course of years. The facade of prosperity that Daniel and Melissa had so conspicuously maintained crumbled under scrutiny, exposing a financial reality far more precarious than initially conceived, one paved with a series of questionable decisions and significant losses in obscure ventures that had remained perpetually concealed from public knowledge. Daniel, the son, now presented as a man consumed by a desperate craving for validation and a lifestyle that his genuine capabilities were incapable of underwriting. His professional trajectory was punctuated by grandiose ventures that invariably culminated in failure, leaving behind a trail of substantial debts and impatient creditors. This invisible pressure, a weighty burden of accumulated expectations and setbacks, had morphed into a potent catalyst for the desperate plot. The life insurance concept was not a mere whim, but a lifeline, an illusory escape from a labyrinth of financial obligations that were asphyxiating him. Melissa, in turn, emerged as the driving force behind the extravagance and unrestrained consumption. Bred in an environment where status and affluence served as the principal currency, she viewed her marriage to Daniel as a vehicle for social advancement. Yet the reality of their dwindling finances propelled her towards despair. Her calculating coldness and adeptness at manipulating appearances rendered her an unyielding accomplice, perhaps even the silent architect of a portion of the strategy. The insurance policy, for her, embodied the concretization of material aspirations, a bridge to a life of luxury she believed she was entitled to, irrespective of the human cost. The preliminary forensic analysis of the items furnished by Helena, a former educator of considerable perspicacity, has begun to unravel the meticulousness of the scheme. The suspect devices within the SUV, for instance, were no mere amateur contrivances. They indicated an advanced technical acumen, suggesting a sophisticated manipulation of the vehicle's security systems, a feat that only perverse and meticulous minds could conceive. The forgery of Helena's signature on the insurance policy, in turn, was of an unnerving precision, replicating specific traits from an earlier phase of the elderly woman's life, which denoted prior research and a considerable effort to ensure the document's apparent authenticity. The dynamic between Daniel and Melissa, once perceived as a union forged by mere expedience, was now exposed as an intricate dance of dependence and manipulation. This was not merely a partnership in crime, but a toxic symbiosis, where each individual's vulnerabilities fueled the other's ambition. Melissa, driven by her insatiable avarice, goaded Daniel, whose wavering character and aversion to failure rendered him malleable and prone to yielding to pressure. This pathological interdependence, wherein each served as a mirror and a reinforcement of the other's most reprehensible instincts, was the engine driving the unfolding cruelty. With each fresh revelation, the web of deceit metastasized, intimating that the plot against Helena was not a solitary act of desperation, but the culmination of a series of morally dubious decisions and an escalating spiral of depravity. The veneer of Maplewood as an idyllic sanctuary crumbled, exposing the fissures beneath its polished facade. Elias recognized that he was confronting a case that would test the very boundaries of his expertise, as the true nature of evil, at times, resides in those from whom it is least anticipated. The investigation now entered an even more precarious phase, where every maneuver needed to be meticulously calculated to defuse a familiar time bomb. Agent Elias Thorne's investigative trajectory, which had hitherto resembled a meticulous exercise in refinement, underwent an abrupt metamorphosis, devolving into an excavation in treacherous terrain. As he probed the most obscure recesses of the suspect's digital universe, far beyond the initially accessed records, he encountered a meticulously camouflaged virtual compartment. This was no mere repository of financial documents or trivial email exchanges, but an encrypted archive, a digital stronghold emanating an aura of secrecy and premeditation. The difficulty in accessing it only amplified the premonition that its contents harbored a disturbing truth. Having finally breached the digital barrier, Elias found himself confronted with a staggering compendium of annotations and records. This was no mere blueprint for financial malfeasance. It was the very architecture of a degradation. The entries detailed, with clinical detachment and chilling precision, the relentless monitoring of Helena's psychological state. There were minute descriptions of her escalating bewilderment, the erosion of her self-assurance, and the impact of each subtle exclusion upon her spirit. The notes laid bare a kind of macabre experimentation, where every instance of isolation was a calculated maneuver to undermine the elderly woman's resilience, as though they were conducting a study on human frailty. Beyond the avarice that fueled the policy, a perverse craving for control became evident, a sadistic satisfaction derived from observing the gradual disintegration of a life. The documents divulged a delight in emotional manipulation, in orchestrating an atmosphere of utter helplessness. It was not merely the intention to extinguish a life for material gain. It was the compulsion to deconstruct an individual's identity, to obliterate their very essence even before their physical existence ceased. This dimension of cruelty elevated the case to a level of depravity that Elias had rarely witnessed, transmuting the crime from a premeditated murder into a protracted psychological torment. The unveiling of this concealed stratum irrevocably reshaped the agent's perception of the suspects. The image of Daniel and Melissa as mere opportunists, driven by financial desperation, dissolved entirely. A far more sinister countenance emerged, that of individuals capable of intrinsic malice, who reveled in the suffering of others. The icy detachment with which they described Helena's decline, the celebration of each minor triumph in their project of dehumanization, signaled a complete severance from any vestiges of empathy. And with that phrase, Elias departed, carrying with him not just another case closed, but the indelible memory of a woman who, when forgotten by her own, chose not to disappear, and, in doing so, exposed to the world that the most dangerous evil is not the one that screams, but the one that whispers within familiar walls. The mountains of Maplewood returned to their quietude, but never to silence.